So I've been paying attention to what's going on lately just because I'm somebody who likes to figure things out. I ask a lot of why questions in life just because I'm a thinker, I'm somebody who likes to learn. I really have a knack for learning. I have a drive for it. And I feel like it's something a lot of people should allow themselves to develop too, right? If you love learning, you essentially have a drive for novelty. That means that you like to learn new things because you like your mind to be refurbished with new information, meaning that you like to figure things out for how they are, and you like to see if there's something new that you can use in real life with that information. This world is driven by data. It's why it's so highly sought after, why it's something companies will pay tooth and nail for, because they understand that data rules, right? It shapes how we think. It shapes our lives in general, right? So these surveillance systems that we got going around, these fusion centers that collect data, they do so because they understand that the value of it is immense at this time. Information in general is something that that we've always sought for. There's been wars fought for information. There's been chaos and social dynamics with negative energy created for data, because we understand that information is the key here, right? Our knowledge progresses and our consciousness progresses because of information. Once we figure out something new that we can agree on, that we use, and then eventually has the ability to create, it gives us potential to have value, right? And that's just how it works. So from what I've noticed, because of information and its necessity and its value as it relates to today, because we care so much about maintaining at least some sort of progression, although many won't admit, especially the controllers of this system who create a stagnant format, right? If you notice, most people are not being able or are not motivated to elevate their situations, just because the programming that we have here within our social systems and our social groups, right, through our conversation, through our communication, through our meeting places, and through our friendships and connections in general, allow us to develop a sense of normalcy within what we do, right? So when stagnancy becomes normal, it essentially means that you're okay with your position as it is, as long as your comfort is enabled and other things that allow you to see things for what they are without needing change necessarily, right? And it doesn't have to be immediate as well. You can have change. It's just, for the most part, people assume that change is always going to be there regardless of stagnancy or whatnot. But the overall positions that we have ourselves in remain the same because we're programmed that way. That's just how society has operated for a while for now. So when you think about it this way, and you tell yourself, so if stagnancy is the base format just because we're programmed that way, and there's not really much to do outside of learning new things in that stagnancy and trying to improve your situations, what is keeping up with novelty, right? What's maintaining that sense of novelty if learning can't really go too far beyond the bounds of where you're at personally, right? Wherever your situation represents itself, if it can't go anything much more than what you're seeing immediately, where are we getting this novelty, right? So for most people, it's just find new jobs, find new friends, try to make new connections, create new assets, or buy new assets if you have enough money to do that, and try to create with those assets, right? And that's essentially how life is programmed here. You want to do something in general. It doesn't matter what career you choose, but you want to do something. You want to be able to interact with people who do the same thing, so you learn and level up in that something, and then eventually you learn new things to help you polish that format that you've created, right? That's how jobs work. That's how new relationships work. That's how friendships work. That's how pretty much everything is programmed and how they're powered, right? So we decide what we want to do, where we want to go, what kind of people we want to have around us, and then we choose to maintain that position somehow, right? You do your best to keep it polished. You do your best to keep going in within it, and you do your best to add more context who allow you to elevate in that position, right? Because they enable you and you learn from each other. So what I've discovered then is that we have to figure what is keeping our novelty, right? What is the main thing that allows us to want to continue interacting with one another despite our stagnancy or despite our programmed identities, right? So I figured that for the most part, we maintain something at the core of it. So when you think about conversation and you think about what the basis is for most people when it comes to conversation, you have to consider what is the context. You have to consider energetically what is being perceived. What is the intent of somebody's speech, right? Like, what are they trying to tell you? What are they trying to teach you? What are they showing you through presence? What is their action saying about them? What does the people around them that enable that speech say about them? What is the fact that they stay around those kind of people mean, right? And so when you start thinking about these kind of things, you tell yourself, okay, so to maintain conversation in any context, you have to discover what it is that people want to hear about, right? It's the entertainment value. If you decide that you want to stick around a certain social group because they talk about cars, that's because you like cars, they like cars, and it's an easy way to connect, right? Same thing with sports, basketball, football. Same thing with certain jobs, right? If you like to do carpentry, or if you like to do architecture, right? Those kind of things allow for connection. So you look at that, you tell yourself, so this is what builds this connection, right? When I'm with these people, when I'm doing this job, when I'm doing this task, conversation is enabled because of that context, right? Whether it be whatever, right? Botany or something. So you discover what that is, and then that's basically the core of conversation to be enabled, right? So you tell yourselves that this is what we want to keep talking about because it's warm ground for conversation. It can build, you can build from it, you can learn from it, and it's easy for everybody to conversate and participate in. So then what if there isn't a certain context, right? What if there isn't something that everybody is engaging in, right? What if there is not a core structure that we can speak on? That tells us, okay, maybe there is something more inherent to humans that allows normal speech outside of something external, right? So for the most part, I've noticed that when we conversate energetically, and I like to learn about things energetically because spirituality has been a really popular topic in general, just because there have been a whole lot of things in the past where people didn't really understand the context of, because there are a lot of things not spoken out loud, and you have to discover and discern for yourself what it is that most people operate on when they speak, right? So for the most part, alignment defines how speech is formulated with somebody. So whether you're morally aligned or immorally aligned, basically when you speak to people and when they converse back with you, you're acknowledging that alignment. If you're not acknowledging the alignment, you're in opposition to the other person, because it means you understand that their alignment is different from yours. So you're not necessarily looking to build through conversation, but to oppose or to defend, because your moral alignment shows you how you inherently operate when you conversate. And when you're in opposition to somebody else, it basically says that we have, I guess you could say, irreconcilable differences in approach. So that means that the conversation is not really fruitful. It's not really well built for a back and forth, right? And I could see this as being the case for most people, right? Your alignment tells a lot about you. It speaks to how your life has represented itself, how you have tried to operate. And if your alignment says that the people around you agree with that, then that means you've done a great job in discerning kindred people, or people who understand you spiritually and energetically, and then that allows beneficial conversation. I do say that there is still something to gain from back and forth with people who oppose your alignment, because they come with different perspectives. And I'm somebody who's very understanding. I come from the idea that, there's always something to learn from somebody. It doesn't matter who they are. It could be a child, it can be a woman, man, older or younger. There's always something to learn, because their perspective is always going to be different, even if their alignment is the same or different, right? So I decided, like, you know what, I could just speak to anybody I want to, because there's always something for me to learn as long as I'm understanding, and I give grace and allow them to give their opinions and whatnot. You don't want to be somebody who's so combative that you can't allow their side of the conversation to be input, right? You want people to be themselves and speak around you freely, so that way you can learn as well as they can from you. But anyways, this tells me that based on alignment, you have to split people up, right? So half of them, I would say, are immorally aligned, and the other half morally aligned. Or it could be a different ratio other than that, depending on how life represents itself. I think for most people, they think it's more like 70-30, 80-20, immoral to moral, just because the system programs us to be disrespectful to a degree, right? We allow disrespect, and because that's kind of an easy thing to engage in for most people, because you don't really have to worry about the emotional aspect or filtering the way you speak, as long as it doesn't matter what you say. Most people are supposed to be able to build the internal mechanisms to not give a damn about what's being said anyway, but you still want to try to learn. But anyways, since disrespect is maintained, and it's something that most people allow themselves to engage in, because for the most part it's like a humorous thing, right? If you can essentially disrespect somebody and they not understand what you're talking about, that allows a humor aspect, right? The concept that there's always something novel in humor to be found, right? And this is why I really love comedians, because they're always bringing in that humor aspect, whether through disrespect or through truths. But the idea is that disrespect is enabled. So the thing about it with programming, and when it comes to the US or just in general, the disrespect is enabled because it allows many perspectives to come about. But there's also the inside joke narrative, right? So for the most part, there's always something to be laughed about, right? And you always want to maintain human laughter, especially with what's going on. You don't want to keep having to be so serious all the time, and you don't always want to have to think about what the future looks like, and you want to be more present in the moment. And the best way for most people is to engage in that humor aspect, which just so happens to be disrespect more often than not. There are definitely other ways to have humor, right, within social systems, but for the most part, disrespect is the normal. So this tells me, okay, if disrespect or extractive conversation methods become the norm, what is the source of that? What is the core of disrespect? And essentially, when you think about it energetically, it's the need to understand somebody, right, fully, based on their alignment, based on who they are as a person, their character, and to see if you can demean the character in a way that allows a bit of their perspective to be dimmed, right? This light dimming culture that we see going on. People decide, well, if we just, as long as nobody gets hurt, and as long as there's no, there's not too much chaotic violence built from disrespect, you could just say something disrespectful to people and it really doesn't matter. But I've noticed that because this has been programmed for such a long time, and because most people decide that it's okay and normal, and because many people have learned to regulate their nervous systems in ways that allow for disrespect without necessarily feeling extracted or exploited from, and it becomes a normalcy, we start to see different kinds of personalities develop, right? This is where the narcissism comes from. This is where sociopathy comes from. This is where cluster B disorders come from. This is where people who oppose that come from. This is where people who decide I can engage in this every so often come from. It's the idea that because it's normalized and has been for such a long time, we decide to change our whole framework to enable it, because most people agree with it, most people enable it, and most people are comfortable in that shadow, or are comfortable in that perspective. So this means that the core is extractive, the core is exploitative. And that means that there's something else that people subscribe to subconsciously when it comes to conversation. And for what I've noticed, I believe that sadism is at the helm, or at least at the core of every social system for the most part, energetically, right? Sadism is what's being silently upheld because it means that there is agency to be able to disrespect or tear down without repercussion, right? This is why you see people talking about accountability is a thing of the past, why people think accountability doesn't exist, or why accountability is just a waste of time, because most people don't have it in general, right? So that demeaning culture that's enabled because of the programming means that sadism is enabled inherently without control at all, without any need to keep that narrative belittled or in a controlled environment. So that means that sadism is what powers most social systems. And this means, for the most part, that there are always going to have to be something to extract from or exploit in order to use disrespect energetically and it be maintained, right? There's always going to have to be a source of disrespect. And for the most part, we have decided collectively that reputation is where we're going to get that from. So reputation, I actually have a conflicting opinion about. I don't think reputation has any real value anymore, because there's no way to uphold it if disrespect is normalized. There's no way to decide that you can have a reputation if it can easily be dismantled by a random person because it's was programmed to be fought against anyway. So reputation really doesn't have value. It's really not anything to be worried about. I don't even think that it's something that's a thing anymore, right? Reputation is just how you are perceived by people at a specific certain time, right? So if they decide to make this box based on your persona, based on how they've collected information about you or data about you, they put all that information into a box, and that's basically your reputation in their eyes. That's their perception of you. And since most people are locked to perceptions because for the most part it benefits people if they decide that that's what they want to operate on in their social group. So with sadism as the base and with reputations as the source of attacking, you need people to keep building source. So for the most part, the source is your character. Your character is based on what you've learned, who you operate with, how you speak, what you know, what you've created, how creative you are, your traits, your gifts, your skills, your talents. All of that is put into a box that we call reputation. But that's just your reputation. That's just your character, right? The thing is this is not always known to people. Some people decide that they want to create a reputation about people based on what they perceive. It doesn't have to be true, and it doesn't have to have actual value. So when you have a reputation created from other people and they decide to attack that, the weight of the sadist or the sadistic extraction that they get is based on the truthfulness of that reputation box that they create. So essentially it becomes like an addiction loop. So the sadism at the base of conversation is the source of the programming, and the programming, because it happens over and over, becomes an addiction loop, and it becomes how most people decide that they want to operate. They don't understand, for the most part, most people don't understand that you get addicted to the programming because you do it over and over. The repetition without discerning if it's changing your character or if it's changing or shaping the way you speak or operate becomes addiction, because you don't see if it's changing you. So sadism becomes the addiction in normal conversation. And that is kind of what the goal is when it comes to at least US conversation and social systems. The goal is to silently get that idea off to people and allow them to engage in that freely without needing to control it or change it at all. And it basically becomes a normalcy. And the normalcy is what makes the addiction avail. You can't even, you won't even be able to discern if it is an addiction, because most people do it. Unless you have been around more people that don't do that, then you understand that it's normalized because most do, in your reality at least. Now, everyone's reality is consistent, right? Because we all live on the same planet, but it can be shaped or changed based on where you live. So let's say you live in a low vibrational area. Let's say the people around you operate on low vibrations just because, again, that's part of the programming, and it enables sadism. So your perception of reality changes based on how often you stick in that area, how often you live in that area, and how often you engage with people in that area, right? It's a subconscious thing. So say you live in a low vibrational area and you're a high vibrational person. You're basically somebody who has real character, because to be high vibrational, you have to live on truths, which basically means that your character is more authentic and less fake than those around you, right? So to be high vibrational means that you understand what it means to actually learn and embody traits that you can use physically for yourself, or to be more approachable or more understanding of people. And that basically allows those traits allow for you to have a reputation created for you. So essentially, when a high vibration person comes into a low vibrational area and sticks around for a bit, those people will create a perception of you and put it in a box called reputation. Now that reputation, like I said, is based on truths, and it can be demeaned upon based on if they choose to or not. Which is why I think we're starting to understand that the reputation really doesn't have value then, even though that it can be built on truths, or it has the ability to be shaped by others, right? The fact that programming allows people to harm the character, and it actually shape how they see you, right? Especially if somebody is more susceptible to believing people based on what they say first, without immediately understanding the whole dynamic itself. If they tell themselves that the perception they have of somebody defines their reputation, and that's that, then essentially that means that the reputation does not have any real value, because they can just decide how they feel about you, and that's that, right? That's their perception. And that's why I kind of see how most people decide that perception is what they live on, and they can't change that, especially if it has benefits, like I say, or like we all agree on is the case when it comes to most social systems. So if sadism is the base, if reputation doesn't have value, if low vibrationals or low vibrational areas enable that initial programming, and if high vibrational people break the programming essentially, then that means that the reputation doesn't hold weight, and that sadism actually is destructive inherently. And I think we already know that, right? Sadism is something, has always been something that has been a subconscious thing. We've never really tried to dismantle sadism because it's funny. Like, if we're gonna be honest, it's funny when we're talking about somebody saying, "Oh, your neck looks fat," or "your shoes are leaning." We're saying that because we think it's funny, right? We're engaging with those same concepts because they're funny, right? Especially if people are laughing at it, right? It's funny, but we don't understand that it actually has real world consequences when we connect perception to reality based on reputations that don't hold weight. So that means if you can get your perception based on a false reputation, whether you decide to or not, and you can get that in the correct spaces or to the right people, that would actually harm somebody's ability to build for themselves or to operate normally in the society, then that means that sadism has a real destructive value that shouldn't have real value, because reputation doesn't have real value. Unless we uphold truthful reputation only, and not perception-based reputation that can change depending on how somebody feels about you, or depending on if they can get multiple people to agree on that perception, then that means that essentially reputation can harm you indirectly without it having legitimacy, which is a danger, right? And because this is enabled over and over, we start to see different dynamics. So I think, personally, this is how narcissism became the norm. This is how I think things like back and forth between low vibrationals and high vibrationals began, right? And I think in the past, it at least used to be healthier. We at least used to be able to go back and forth without actually trying to demean or harm in an indirect way physically, right? So I think as this progressed, it got worse. Sadism enabled some seriously dangerous things, and people get marginalized this way. So to a degree, if we enable it and we say to ourselves, it doesn't really matter what our perception is, because people have the agency to do what they want. If we say that but still try to maintain that narrative because we can't change our perceptions, then there is an inherently and existentially dangerous concept to human conversation. And I think that's the danger that we're actually perceiving, that most people can't really speak to or articulate. I've discerned that for the most part, because of sadism, because of our need not to control it, and because it actually upholds power structures today, right? I don't like using elites because that gives off the perception that they have, that they're more able or more able-bodied than most people, because wealth is not a real definer of influence or of talent, right? It's more of an accumulation of what you've done in your life, right? You like to build money, so you build money. But anyways, our elites essentially use sadism to control, and they use it to uphold their power structure. And I think that's where that's at the control, at the core of racism. I think it's at the core of fascism, at the core of comparison and racial disparity. I think sadism is at the core of everything that we operate on. And it's why most people consider or don't understand that it has destructive nature, because most people don't understand how destructive it can be, unless you're somebody who has experienced the raw end of the stick, where you're at the behest of those attacks, right? So sadism at the core essentially becomes an existential crisis, because it means that eventually somebody is going to be having a perception from other people that is against their will. If we say that our perception is defined, let's say for instance, let's say you live in a neighborhood and everybody around you decides their perception of you is defined. There's no changing it, there's no altering it, there's nothing that anything can be done about it, right? Outside of their perception. If that perception and reputation box they've created is negative or exploitative or destructive, that means that you have to live on that exploitative box, because you live in that area and you have to interact with those people over and over again. And if you notice anything about conversation or about reputation, the more reinforcement you get with a reputation box, the more people decide in their minds that it's true, whether that's correct or not. But because there's no control of those narratives, you have to decide yourself that reputation doesn't matter. You have to decide for yourself that perception doesn't matter to you. And you have to decide for yourself that in order for you to operate, you have to come with the mind and the higher moral thinking that reputation never mattered in the first place. It never had any legitimacy to begin with. Those that still allow themselves to allow perception to sway that, though, are more stagnant in nature. And that's part of the programming. They're more able to navigate within the social systems they're in, because they understand that their place, as far as their reputation, can be maintained because most people around them allow that.